Yeah, I thought you and I were. Are we live?
So we're just going to wait for Triana to join us. Thanks, everybody. We can't start without the main person. I think it would be not a very good session with just us two, Shannon, talking. We'll give Triana a couple more minutes.
Okay. I could get started.
That was my bad. I totally forgot that we all had to press the button. So I was just sitting there waiting for things to happen.
You are really testing us today, Triana. We feel as if we can't believe this. Like, we can't deliver this session on our own. We need you.
Okay, I don't want to cut into any of our toes. Well, welcome, everyone. Good morning, Mark Dreaman. I'm Shannon Battenfeld with Laura Curtis. We're from Sercante. We'll be the moderators for this session. If you have any questions or comments, just pop them in the chat or Q&A tab, and we're going to be monitoring them, answering the best we can. Any leftover questions, we will address at the end. And with that said, I'd like to intro our speaker, Triana Jarman. Welcome.
Thank you, Shannon. Right, let's get started. I will share my screen. Okay, let's kick things off. So thank you everybody for joining me on day 2 of Mar Dreaming. And what we're going to talk about today is how to build connected Pardot campaigns following some 6 simple steps that should guarantee success. And just a little bit about me. My name is Triana Jarman. I am a senior lead consultant at MarCloud Consulting, and we are the go-to Salesforce partner for all of your kind of marketing needs when it comes to the Salesforce ecosystem. So we support clients with Pardot, Marketing Cloud Account Engagement, Marketing Cloud Engagement, B2BMA as well. And before I dive into the good stuff, just want to take a moment to give a thanks to all the sponsors who have made this event possible. So let's start with why campaign setup is important. And I think we can all probably agree on the first point, which is reporting. So when you actually kind of set your campaign up appropriately, and especially if you're going to be using Salesforce to report on your campaigns, then that's just going to kind of obviously all lend itself to being able to report well on the activity that you're running and give you valuable insights that you need on your campaign activity. The other thing is around efficiency. So by stepping back and taking a little bit of time to think through your campaign and the setup and kind of doing everything in, to say, a certain order, it will just help you get everything set up well, you know, in a kind of usually a timely fashion, which just everyone wants to save a bit of time these days. And lastly is user experience. So by making sure that you've kind of thought through your campaign setup and just the whole process generally, you really give yourself the opportunity to pick up on where there might be any points that are, from a user experience perspective, that they're not kind of, you know, dropping off when they shouldn't, that they're getting autoresponder emails when they should, and just all of those things that, again, just makes for a really solid user experience. So what I'm going to go through today are just 6 steps to help, again, with that kind of campaign setup. So the first thing will be about mapping the campaign journey. Then we'll go into Salesforce campaign setup, followed by how you can align marketing assets, and also making sure we take into consideration offline activity. And then a favorite topic of mine, UTM tracking. And then we'll wrap up with thorough testing. So let's dive straight in to mapping the campaign journey. At this stage, you're not doing anything in Pardot. And by the way, I am going to be saying Pardot throughout, and I apologize in advance for not using NCAE at this point. But you're not going to be doing anything in Pardot. You need to kind of step back and think through a few questions like, what's the purpose of your campaign? Is it, demand generation, or are you just kind of driving awareness? Is it reactivating cold data? Whatever your general campaign could be about, just having that understanding of what it is will lend itself to kind of the rest of the setup. So, like, for example, what are the key metrics of success, and how are you going to measure those within your campaign? And also then thinking through who's going to be in your campaign, because there would certainly be a difference if you were just doing a reactivation campaign, who that audience is, which is a known and quite maybe a cold audience, compared to promoting a new webinar where you're going to have a mix of net new and maybe a known audience. And then equally, where is that audience coming from? Is it all already people who are in your Pardot.org, or are you going to be kind of reaching out to, again, that net new audience using, like, Google, ads, or, LinkedIn paid ads, that kind of thing. And then once you kind of have that also idea about where people are coming from, you can then make sure that you understand how they're actually, to say, entering and starting their campaign journey. So, are they going to all be able to fill in a form, or are some people going to have to be manually imported? So just thinking through that really helps as well. And then also listing out all of the actions that you want to have happen throughout the campaign and that journey, and also whether you want to be tracking everything and how they should be tracked. And again, I'm not just thinking about like engagements to you, I'm thinking kind of that, complete end-to-end process of, from the point that maybe someone is filling in a form initially, and that's adding them maybe to the engagement studio, and then maybe there are triggers that are making alerting sales to certain actions that people are doing, like all of those things all the way in between, just really kind of mapping all of that out and making sure you know what you do want tracked. And my top tip for doing this is to either, if you want to be old-fashioned about it, get a pencil and paper and kind of draw it out, or you could use something like Draw.io, Lucidchart, or Mira are also really good platforms to just kind of get those ideas down, and that will again just kind of help get everything from inside of your head out onto paper. So once we've mapped out our campaign journey and we know what's happening and who and all that good stuff, we need to look at setting up our Salesforce campaign. And with this, some key considerations are about whether a hierarchy is required. So if in the way you structure your Salesforce campaigns, if you are using a hierarchy, just what does that need to look like? Do you need a grandparent, parent, and child setup, or are those child campaigns representative of all of the different sort of tactics that you're using for your campaign, kind of like in this example image here, or do you just need a parent campaign and that's it? So just knowing that will just let you know then all of the campaigns you need to set up in Salesforce. You also should have an understanding about whether prospects are actually going to be in the CRM to be added to the campaign. So if your process as a business in terms of managing prospects and Pardot into Salesforce is that they need to hit a certain score threshold, will everyone who's going to be part of your campaign hit that score threshold to be added into the CRM, or are some people going to still be in Pardot because they haven't reached that score yet? So thinking that through and just taking into consideration how that might impact you, making sure that everyone is in the CRM campaign later on. And then I'm also a very big fan of using custom campaign member statuses, because they can help give a high level view of where people who have been added to your CRM campaign, kind of where they are in that journey. And so if you are using those, what should those campaign member statuses be? And make sure that you set those up in Salesforce. And I just want to give a little bit of a mini shout out to Stephen Stouffer, who yesterday gave a really great session on building Salesforce campaigns at scale, and he touched on these points as well. And so if you didn't catch his session, I highly recommend when it's available on demand to check that one out. Great, so we've set up our Salesforce campaign, so now we can actually start building things in Pardot. So when you're thinking about aligning the different marketing assets that are in Pardot, I've kind of broken them into three groups. The core assets, these are emails, forms, and landing pages. You may not be using all of these in your campaign. Certainly, I imagine most people will have at least emails and most likely forms. When you're just setting these up, obviously you can align these to your CRM campaign. So this way, all the data points that are being collected in Pardot can actually start to surface in Salesforce, which again lends itself well to reporting later on. We've also got extra assets. So these are just other things that might need to be set up for your campaign. So custom redirects, for example, which, just as a side note, I'm a real big fan of using these in an engagement studio program, especially where in an email you're trying to track and have actions happen off the back of more than one link, just because the way engagement studio is, it's a little bit limited when you're trying to do that for more than one link. So custom redirects is a great bit of a workaround for that. And dynamic content as well. If you have an audience that can have extra personalization done through dynamic content, you definitely would want to use that. And again, because Engagement Studio can't see what's happening within dynamic content in terms of link clicks, custom redirects would be useful here. So this way you can kind of track and also have actions via completion actions happen off the back of those clicks. And with files, again, depending on what your campaign setup is, those can also have completion actions added to those if necessary. So yeah, these are just some extra assets that might be part of your program. And these are last, but they're certainly not least. And in fact, some cases are more the first thing that you would do, are some campaign essentials. So lists, and this is just, because you've mapped out your whole kind of campaign journey, you should have a really good idea of all the lists that are going to be needed for different things, such as a list to add people once they've submitted a form, list for your recipient list of your engagement program, any suppression lists. And if you're using lists for tracking, which again, I'm a big fan of, so you can just know all that up front and make sure you kind of set everything up. So this way it's really easy to attach those lists. So all the items that you're setting up in Salesforce, in Pardot, sorry. Folders, keeping everything organized is very important. So just making sure that you have a really nice folder structure already set up from kind of the get-go. So this way, as you're building out all of these other assets, that you can store them appropriately. And of course, we can't forget our automation. So making sure we set up our Engagement Studio program, and also any maybe related automation rules that are needed to support the whole program generally. So we also want to take a little bit of time to think about our offline activity. And when I'm thinking about offline activity, I'm not necessarily just thinking of things like maybe a direct mail piece like that, like a very, genuinely offline activity. I'm also in my head thinking about offline of Pardot, like someone who a channel of activity where the person isn't getting sent to Pardot directly. So for example, media partners, in some instances, if you're using a media partner to perhaps promote something, that data is being collected by them and is then being sent to you in a CSV file. And so they're not getting into Pardot kind of natively. You will have to do an import. So it's just really thinking through all of your channels and tactics that you're using and thinking about, okay, how is the person going to actually get into the program, the campaign? And I've already jumped ahead to that second point about, just making sure then how is the data being entered? Are there any options to to give someone a form handler, or is it going to have to be a manual import that you do? And then lastly, to say all of the channels, but especially anything offline, is, does the activity need separate tracking, and does it need to be tracked separately as a CRM campaign? And so whether you need to kind of set those up separately in Salesforce, or if you're using it tracking via UTMs. Speaking of UTMs, so before I get into this one, some of you who maybe attended Mar Dreaming last year, and maybe you saw my talk about UTM tracking and how I showed how you could do that from getting UTMs from Pardot into Salesforce on a lead and a contact object, but then also into the campaign member record to again lend itself to campaign reporting. So whether you're doing that or you've got some other kind of setup going on, if you are just generally using UTMs as part of your tracking, and certainly that you're capturing that data in Pardot and Salesforce, you want to make sure that you're listing out all of your campaign URLs, and then you're building out appropriate UTM parameters for each of those. And so again, thinking through all of those kind of, maybe entry points and where UTMs are appropriate on URLs, making sure that you think through all of those. And then with each of those, making sure that there's actually an appropriate conversion point to capture the UTM parameters, because remember that with Pardot, if if someone is just visiting a page with a UTM, it's not going to instantly go into Pardot. It needs to kind of come through usually via a form, for example. So just make sure that, where you want to be capturing UTMs, that there is actually a way for Pardot to receive that data. And kind of to that point, I would say just be careful if you're trying to do a bit of any kind of workaround with applying UTM, such as trying to do it through completion actions, whether that's like on a form or a custom redirect, just because you need to be really certain that with that form, for example, that if you're going to hard code UTM values to be, applied to any prospect that submits a form, that source and medium, that those are the only way that a person could be getting to that form. If there are other possible channels, then it's not going to work, and you're going to end up having skewed data in the system. Right. So we've done kind of all of our setup points, and now we need to do some thorough testing. And I can appreciate, that sometimes we don't all have time to do testing, or at least maybe not always as thoroughly as we want to, but it's really important to do this because it just gives you that opportunity to take a step back and make sure everything is working correctly, lest you find out a month later, as your campaign's been running, that something, wasn't firing, wasn't capturing that right UTM value, and cause yourself a world of pain later. So some key things to check, I would say, is those campaign entry points. So again, just going back to how are people actually kind of starting their campaign journey, and so whether it's from a form or it's through like media partner, Google PPC ads, that you kind of know exactly what would be the steps of that user journey and people entering your campaign. Completion actions. So across the board, whether they're on forms, they're on your custom redirects, or automation rules, just making sure that they're firing the way you want them to, and also testing with kind of like a net new and also an existing prospect. And does it, do you cover both bases if required? And, is that, again, that user journey is happening the way it should? The CRM campaign assignment piece, again, is really important, especially if you're going to be relying on Salesforce campaigns to do reporting. So are people being added to your campaign? Are the campaign members being collected with the appropriate data, such as UTMs, if you're doing that, or any other valuable data points? And if there are people who aren't going into the CRM, because again, you might have a score threshold that's not allowing them to be, what then are your other options for being able to kind of report holistically on your campaign will just be something to consider. And again, kind of already mentioned it a little bit, but the UTMs and any other tracking that you're doing, just making sure that those data points, that they're being captured correctly and that they are being added between Pardot and Salesforce at all the appropriate points that you want, and you're not missing out on any valuable data. Cool. So just a very quick recap then. So our kind of steps for successfully setting up a campaign is we're mapping out that campaign journey so we know exactly what's happening from end to end. We are then setting up our Salesforce campaign and doing it in such a way that will lend itself to useful reports later on. We're aligning all of our marketing assets from Pardot, so this way that data is being passed through to our CRM campaigns, and we're also just covering off everything else that connects in between. We've also considered our offline activity and made sure we know how that data is going to get into Pardot if it can't be done automatically. We've set up all of our UTM parameters, and we know exactly where they're all going to be kind of placed and that we can capture them. And we know that because we've done some very thorough testing. And by taking time to kind of go through all of this, it just lends itself to having that better ability to report, creates a process for being able to set up campaigns efficiently, and also just will lend itself to your users having a really great campaign experience because you've taken the time to set everything up really well. And I feel like I have flown through that because that is it. So yeah, thank you all so much for your time and attention, and hopefully we have some time for questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Triana. I think I speak on behalf of everyone here that was such an awesome session. I certainly learned a lot of information from that one. We do have a couple more minutes we have a couple more minutes left for questions. So yeah, Shannon, what have we got going on?
Sure. I will share them one by one. Will you provide a good use case of when campaign hierarchy is appropriate?
Ooh. Yeah, I mean, so I guess, man, that is it's a really good and a really tough question to answer. So with campaign hierarchy, you have to think about, it's about how you can coordinate your campaigns in Salesforce, and then also make sure you're maybe not creating campaigns for like every tiny little line item that you have going on, because that's not always necessarily needed. With a hierarchy, you can kind of have data roll up. So I suppose a good example, let's just take a webinar. So you might have, you might have as part of your hierarchy a grandparent campaign that's called events. And so within that, you might have webinars and then trade shows, and maybe some other things. And so then within those, you would then start to have then sub campaigns for each of your webinars and for each of your trade shows. And so by doing hierarchies in certain ways, it will allow you to report kind of on specific activities that you're doing. And equally, then you can even drill down even further to have kind of your hierarchy reflect different channels of activity. So within your webinar, if you're promoting through, again, like Google PPC ads, or you're using a third-party media partner, or just doing some social media posts, you could have then other individual campaigns for each of those to track that activity level. I hope that answered the question.
We have one more question. Is there any extra configuration required on the Pardot Salesforce side to pass the Salesforce campaign ID over via UTMs? That's
yes, definitely. So I suppose unless because Salesforce and generally it doesn't come set up out of the box with like UTM fields anyway. So if you're going to be capturing that data in Pardot and you want to send it through to Salesforce, then you would need to kind of be setting up. The ideal setup would be, for me, custom UTM fields in Pardot on the prospect. You've then got a matching set of fields on your lead and your contact objects, so those can all be mapped through. And then in terms of actually getting that Salesforce campaign ID from the URL down into those fields would be the same process as you would be to get the UTM fields kind of passed through, whether usually, if it's an iframe or through like a form handler. So there is a little bit of extra configuration required, but certainly is possible.
That's all we've got for Q&A. Oh, here we've got some more. Here we go.
I was far too efficient in my talking.
Yeah. What best practices can you recommend for standardizing campaign member status?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I really like actually basing them off of the campaign record types that you as an organization would decide to use. So that is kind of where you would start. So as opposed to just having, again, out of the box, all campaigns are just kind of a master record type, but you can set up custom campaign record types to group your campaigns based on potentially different like objectives. So you could have campaigns that are all about awareness. You could have campaigns that are all about demand generation, and maybe you have to say customer campaigns. So whatever your campaign record types, you'd have to kind of determine what those buckets would be. And then based on those, you can then decide, okay, well, in these types of campaigns, you know, what are we doing? What are the steps that are happening along the way typically? And that will then lend itself to knowing what your campaign member statuses are. And in terms of standardizing them, so to really help your team make sure that whenever they're creating a campaign and they're using the appropriate custom campaign member statuses, there's a few different ways you can actually go about doing this these days, but one of them is there's a new button, well, new, it's been around for a little while, which is where you can clone a campaign with related assets, and campaign member statuses are one of them. So once you know what your kind of different campaign sort of types are, and with the campaign member statuses, you can set up template campaigns within your Salesforce org and with the custom member statuses, so that when you need one, you just need to go to it and you would clone that campaign with the campaign member statuses, and then you can obviously rename it as needed and you know, add appropriate details like that.
Okay, we've got 4 minutes left, so we have a number of questions still. Here we go. I'm using CRM campaign for member status tracking and a separate campaign to track asset management. Should this be one campaign for both, or both for that journey?
Okay, so using campaign member status to track and a separate
Campaign.
I think I'm understanding this. So, and Andrew, you might have to like comment in the session. So you have like, you have a campaign with campaign members that you're tracking in there, and then you have a different campaign that is just tracking the assets and like in the engagement with those assets. I kind of feel like I want to say that they should be one campaign, but I'm just trying to make sure I understand the setup, and we might have to message. Oh, I can see you. Okay, so I guess what I would say is, so if your campaign and it has assets, so you can attach all of those assets to your core campaign, and those will be tracked to say separately within Salesforce via the new kind of like there's lightning components that now tell you what the email engagement, form, and landing page engagement are. So you can see that. And then, you know, your campaign member statuses would just generally be telling you where people are in that overall journey. So again, depending on what your campaign member statuses are, and you're kind of tracking them from kind of starting the campaign, doing a few things in the middle, and kind of ending, you can use then the campaign member statuses for that. So I feel like you should be able to do that all in one. Feel free to message me later if I didn't really answer your question.
Sure. Okay, how about, can we talk about the pros and cons of using the Pardot Google Analytics connector versus UTM fields?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Okay, so I guess some of the downfalls with the Google Analytics connector is that it is only capturing the UTMs at the first touch point. And it's only going to happen for kind of net new people as well. So let's say you have an existing database, and you got Pardot and you added people to the Pardot org and started marketing, those folks are never going to have the Google Analytic UTM values connected to them, because they're already there. It will only appear for net new people, and again, also only at the first touch point. I've also seen it happen sometimes where they just don't seem to always populate. So my preference to having the custom fields and then having them on kind of like all of your forms already set up is, I feel like it gives you greater control of knowing what the UTMs are that you're capturing, and really ensuring that they are going to get onto the records. And it also gives you the flexibility to capture first touch and last touch as well, and to do some pretty cool things with that information passing through into Salesforce.
Great. There is another one. Do you use a template or resource that you share with the team as you work through the steps?
I have had like kind of, I guess, sort of, maybe not a formal template. No, I suppose a lot of it sometimes is either just in my head or I've just kind of jotted out. But I think you could certainly put something together, especially if there's a certain process that you have as a business where you kind of know, like, these are all the kind of steps that we need to go through more specifically when we're setting up a campaign. If I can find something, I'll try and dig it out and share it around.
Perfect. I know I use a Google Doc.
Yeah, I'm like, I think I just have a Google Doc.
Okay. We've just got a few minutes left. So
I think we've got a few seconds left, Triana. So we're down to 10 seconds, guys, before we get kicked out. Thank you so much for all your questions. Make sure you're visiting our sponsors. Thank you so much to them, and enjoy the rest of Mar Dreaming.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Laura and Shannon.
Bye.